You are listening to Missed Apex Podcast. We live F1. Welcome to Midweek Missed Apex. It's our strategy corner. I'm your host, Richard Reddy, but my friends call me Spanners. So, let's be friends. This week, we are going to focus on the interesting strategy elements that came out of Monza and look forward to Baku and Singapore. Now, I am joined, first and foremost, in this strategy corner, because I'm sure it'll be a lot of tyre talk, by Matt Trumpets. Hello, Matt.
Going to the Glen, baby. I'm very excited for this week.
Oh, yes. So you and I are trusting that young Australian fella to do the race review, but we'll be back midweek to mop up because, you know, the youngs, they forget things.
They do. But it's a very exciting strategy corner we're about to have here.
Yeah. Why don't we have two top level international strategists on? Just the kind of thing that we casually do here on Missed Apex Podcast. You're used to him by now, but it's still special to have ex-Mercedes and HAAS team strategist Mike Caulfield on. Hello, Mike.
Hello. Yep, good to be back. I'm looking forward to this.
And we have a special guest all the way from America land. We've got the 2311 NASCAR team strategist, JR Houston, joining us. Thank you for taking a few minutes from your busy schedule, JR.
Of course. Glad to be here. Glad to be back.
You're a massive F1 fan, right?
Yep, big F1 fan.
Yeah, and so you I think you're the equivalent to Mike, but in NASCAR. So I'm sure you're going to have some great questions for Mike. Do you fancy trying your hand at some F1 strategy one day?
I think so. I've watched enough, and there's enough goofy stuff that goes on in our little NASCAR world that maybe it's a little simpler in F1. Maybe it's more complicated. I don't know.
Oh, that feels like a gauntlet thrown down, Mike. Do you reckon you could nip over to... This is like Carl Larson versus Verstappen, but with strategists instead.
And then we both just start sucking right after we both make our statements.
Yeah. Oh, poor Larson put it in the wall, didn't he, in Atlanta? Yeah, really tempted to write under all those comments. Verstappen would have just continued going left, but I didn't. I resisted. So, JR, you're going to give us a bit of a preview of our trip to Watkins Glen and what we're going to look out for. We're going to try and get our F1 audience watching that this weekend along with us. But why don't we start first with any questions, JR, you might have for a former Formula One strategist. Hit us up.
Yeah, I actually talked to a lot of the guys here at 2311 and tried to come up with some good questions. So I'll just fire off right into the nitty gritty. So one thing that we fight a lot in our world is going to racetracks that are either repaved or a new tire compound. So kind of like how much historical data versus just kind of raw wigging it is being done to try and predict, say, when you go to a new place or a new tire goes onto the race cars?
Great question.
Yes. So that is a great question. There is a little bit of a both across looking at historical data and sometimes it is that kind of, we've got to wait and see. As the season goes on, generally in F1 for the last few seasons anyway, Pirelli have kind of brought the same compounds year on year, maybe changing one compound. And you try to then kind of look at where it is in winter testing to see where it is relative to the other ones. And you start using that kind of data to build up where it sits relating to the other ones as the season goes on. So, for example, Monza just being in F1, you look at kind of past races and see, right, what have we had this season? How are the compounds aligning? Is it matching what they were aligning last season, 2023, 2022? And try and build up that historical data to see it. In terms of that kind of the repaving, I think that's the biggest unknown. So Monza, again, prime example, was fully repaved going into it. So you're kind of a bit unsure how the compounds are gonna behave. But Pirelli are kind of useful, so they'll do a laser scan of the track, so they'll show what the kind of micro and macro roughness is of it, so you can then see where it aligns up with other tracks we've been at this season in terms of that one. So then again, you're using actual data you have to try and see, right, how is that aligned? Where is it closest to? I think Monza was potentially aligned with kind of a Montreal things. Obviously, they're then very different potentially. I can't remember if it was Montreal. I can't remember off the top of my head what it was. but there might be certain different energy inputs into that. So then you've got to take that into account. So I think that's when the wigging it comes into it in a little bit. So you kind of build up that best case scenario. You try and look and kind of estimate how it's going to be. And then you get into P1 and P2 in practice. And then that's when you start building up your data and say, right, how does it align? What kind of conditions are we seeing? How are you expecting it to kind of develop over the weekend as well?
Yeah, and how quick? Yeah, I was going to say that was going to be my follow up. Was like, how quickly do you know whether your predictions were right? Is it because I think in NASCAR you get about 20 minutes practice and that's it, so you don't really know until the race whether you've got your long run data correct.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I was going to ask. Was when we have our 20-minute sessions, we're one of the first cars on the racetrack, so the track evolution throughout the weekend. With the first time on the racetrack, we always show potentially higher deg than anticipated. So it's really hard to kind of find that nice balance. How much of, obviously, with 3 practice sessions, are you finding yourself pretty close most of the time? Or do you ever have those like, ooh, this is a little bit off, but for the race, I really think it's going to be closer to what I think?
So, that's exactly that. So I think, again, I'm going to keep relating back to Monza because it's the best case and it's really quite frequent in my mind. But that was the one where the track was repaved, it was rubbering in, the track evolution was huge, and you had that kind of consideration of the way the compounds are chosen in F1. I know in NASCAR, you for the most races you only have the one compound, but in F1 we obviously have to bring the 3 compounds. And in Monza, for example, no one used the hard basically until the race. So you still have that estimation of, okay, we're expecting the race to be different to Friday practice because of the evolution. How much different is a bit of an unknown. Again, you try and estimate it. Generally, you do see that improvement from Friday through to Sunday. But with one of the compounds not being used and which was expected to be a full race compound as well, it was a big unknown on what that was actually going to do. And I think even in the race itself, there was quite a big evolution, and you were still trying to see, right, how's this correcting? What is this? Where's this sitting? And this is where you potentially go back to some historical data where you say, right, for example, the hard and medium, it was a C3 and C4. Usually the C3 aligns with the C4. It's this degradation relative to it. But with that new pavement and still the rubbering effect and evolution, it was a bit of an unknown going into the race for it. So yeah, I think the advantage in having the 3 practice sessions does make a big difference. But there are a few examples where obviously Friday's wiped out and then P3 is just used for qualifying, so you have no long run data going into it. Or there's a huge rain Friday, Saturday, where you're going into the race on Sunday, which is you're basically using historical best guess and you've got to act on the fly, really.
Yeah. Matt, you were going to come in there. But before you do, Matt, I think we have to comment for the video people how many trumpets you have in the background. Like, that's so... I know you're Matt Trumpets, and it's plural.
There's a reason I am Matt Trumpets, and you're looking at it.
Going Dora the Explorer style, I can see 10 trumpets. Wow, I think that's too many trumpets. Sorry, continue.
Well, that's life as a professional. You got to have different tools for different jobs. Not everything can be fixed with a hammer, my friend.
Spanner. Yeah, heavy spanner.
No, I wanted to ask because in other series, and I may have asked this before, so apologies if I've forgotten that. But in other series, you can change tires on individual sides, and you can you can mix and match compounds.
Ooh, can you do that in races?
And I'm going to ask Mike, you had a nice career as a strategist. Would that have been something that drove you bonkers trying to figure out? Or would that be something you'd be like, oh, thank goodness we can do that?
Yeah, it's a good one. I mean, I think the way the F1 calendar works, I think we were obviously pushing for more stops. And I think if you started going mixing and matching compounds, and we're very much like focused on energy per corners, you get the balance, you get the simulations, everything, and it's such a short race. I think if you start going down that avenue, you're there in the easy one-stop category because you'll just be basically putting what you need on what corner, get the balance of the car right, and then like half the tracks, like half the side of the car isn't touched, and you're basically based on one limited corner. So you just kind of set it up from that aspect. So I think for me, it probably in an F1 world, it'd be interesting for a little bit, but I think as soon as the simulations come out and everything runs, it'd just be very, very samey. Everyone would iterate to the same thing, and then it would take away a little bit of having to use a poor for a full set of compounds, for example, because you still get that aspect of it where, yeah, the energies might be based on one side of the car, but then your rear left, for example, is cold, and that's still causing a few corners where you're causing issues, and so you're then trying to balance that out in that respect.
JR, surely in NASCAR you only really need to change the outside tires.
Yeah, we'll go with that sometimes.
No, is that how it is? Do you get tons of wear on the outside ones?
Yeah, it's very, very, very track dependent. Obviously we go to 25 or so different racetracks, and so it's similar to F1 in the sense of sometimes you have extreme high deg tracks where you're using probably all of the tires, more so than just two of them. But there are tracks that are low degradation racetracks that the left side is, very little energy going through the left side. So you can replace the right sides only. But the difference that we have also is fuel levels, where the fuel is located, how the fuel burns off, putting tire pressures that are cold because we can't have hot air pressures, putting tire pressures that are cold on the right side of the car starts affecting balance more than actual just raw degradation.
And I'm going to regret this. I'm going to regret this, but Matt, I know you're going to want to talk about the banding on the inside of the tires and how it affects tire warm up and tire deg, because Jensen Button, our friend of the show, Jensen Button, last week mentioned about the inner. Matt, you're the one best to explain it, but basically how NASCAR tires just go because they don't have metal on the inside.
Yeah, basically he said that because they don't run a steel belt, they overheat after about the first lap, and the whole rest of the race then becomes about managing that, or taking advantage of it to rotate the car, I guess, depending upon your driving style. And that's seems very different to what we get in F1. So what is the impact of that when you're planning strategy in terms of, can you anticipate how long you can run those tires before they become thermally compromised?
We do a little bit of tire testing at each track whenever a new tire comes out. But for example, this weekend at Watkins Glen, they're bringing a new tire that theoretically has a lot of degradation. But again, we can go probably 30 to 40 minutes on a fuel run. So about 35 laps or so. And we're only going to get 20 minutes of practice. The longest anybody has ran on this tire is about 20 laps. So it's truly an unknown that what happens after that. We're all going to learn in the race. The good thing is that with stages, with the way that our stage racing works, stage 1 is 20 laps, perfect. Stage 2 is 20 laps, okay. Stage 3 is going to be 50 laps. So stage 3 is really going to be a kind of the end race scenario of an F1 race where, like Mike said earlier, at Monza, nobody had run the hards. That's kind of where we're ending up for this race, is nobody's run past 20 laps, and we're going to have to run either 25 and 25, maybe split it into thirds. It's going to be kind of a toss-up as to what happens there.
So what I'm learning from having spoken to you guys, multiple times now, is I feel like there might be a lot of complexity in F1, Mike, but I feel like your initial plan survives contact with the enemy way more than JR's plan survives contact with the enemy.
Oh yeah, I very much. I mean, I've been doing a little bit of NASCAR work, not for a strategist, but looking into things, and I think the complexities of a NASCAR strategy are immense compared to F1 at times. I think, like you're saying, the stage racing, having to deal with that. You're not just looking on a tire formula, looking on fuel. The caution rules are obviously very different to the safety car rules in F1. So there's a lot more factors which you kind of play out in NASCAR, I think, which you potentially have to take into account for rather than we do in F1. And it's very interesting in that aspect. So, and I think in that respect, there's maybe a few more opportunities where things can happen. If you, for example, something's happened early on in the race, you're in a bit out of position, there's a chance to get it back. Whereas in F1, if something happens lap 1, lap 2, you're pretty much out the race. There's not much coming back from it. But in terms of like a strategic point of view, I think it makes it a bit more interesting to try and do something, and you've got a bit more chance to do something as well.
Yeah, because like I was watching the Atlanta race, and they were talking about Hamlin's lurking in P30. Is he going to make a charge up the field? And you'd obviously never have that in F1, Mike. But when someone has like a pit lane start, or they end up having that little incident that puts them to the back of the grid. Do heads go down because you kind of think, well, my work's nearly done here as a strategist for the day. Am I really going to try and fight and claw to get P17?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's it. You do what you have to do because that's your job, and you've got people who want to rely on you and want to see the team do well. But yeah, at best, unless you see carnage up ahead, there's only so much you can do with strategy to gain some positions. And when you're down in P19, 20 seconds back after the front wing change on lap one, it requires a little bit of fortune for something to come back into it.
Whereas in NASCAR, like the number 2 car literally had a hole in the side, and they put duct tape, squares of duct tape, it looked like, to get it back up and running. Now I know you've got a team meeting to run to, JR, but did you have one more question for Mike? Then we'll get a bit of a preview.
Kind of falls into the same thing that we're talking about right here, is how much do other teams' strategies influence a certain weekend's race plan? So, we actually had a dual compound race not that long ago. We had limited tires. Like I'm sure there's limited sets and stuff for F1 for the weekend as well. But like we had 2 sets of soft and the rest were all hards. And, with the potential of yellows and everything else, we just save those softs, because if we do get a safety car at a certain point, well, you want to have those for a short run to the end. So what ended up happening was most of the field actually just ended up doing the same thing, because we weren't racing each other in a way. We were just racing against the potential of being on the back foot. So like, how much does when you see a team do something else change your plan in terms of, I had a plan, I thought it was going to be the best plan, but now they did something different. I just want to cover what they're doing rather than kind of continuing on my plan for the weekend.
Yeah, there's obviously the 2 concepts. I think over a course of a weekend, so obviously building up, people that use different tires at different point, you'll just stick to your own plan and concentrate around the race. Occasionally in qualifying, you'll maybe like looking for kind of the best way you can get a tow or free air or something. So you may be looking at what other cars are doing and trying to get out in front of them and put you slightly off plan to what you were going beforehand. In a race, it's probably that little bit different, because if everyone goes optimum strategy, basically everyone will finish almost in a position they qualify. Luckily, if it's everyone thinks slightly differently, so maybe everyone's optimum strategies are slightly different, which gives that little bit of variance in there. People get different reads on tire deg and tire lives, so that means them do a little bit different. And then some teams will try some of that little bit off strategy, for example. And I think the one which you try not to react to is that one where you've got the pace in the car and someone's gone stupidly early in a race and you go, I'm not going to cover them here. If I go cover it, it's put me on a suboptimum strategy. I potentially going to lose out to someone else I can beat. But then there are occasions where you'll go, we're really close with pace with these. It's a one stop. Overtaking is difficult. If I don't cover them here, I'm going to get undercut, and then it's going to be really difficult from there. So you got to be a bit fluent on that one. So there are certain tracks where you can stick to optimum and know it'll come good, and there's certain tracks where you potentially have to kind of react to what other people are doing.
We're going to have a proper look back at Monza when JR leaves us, but a good example of that is Sainz looking at the guys ahead of him at the weekend, pitting and going, no, I'm not getting sucked down that path, and being kind of surprised by it and doing that strategy in his head, which I think is something we see from Carlos Sainz quite a lot, and it's quite impressive. So we'll come back to Mike in a minute, but before you go, JR, when you go to a track like Watkins Glen, which is a road course, which does have an F1 history, do you actually find that your strategy and tactics are a little bit closer to what we see in F1? There's going to be less of that coming back from P30 and a little bit more like a traditional kind of, a circuit race.
It's a little bit. I think that the last year when we ran that race, we had no stage breaks. So it was a very natural playing out race. You could run it backwards on fuel because of the low degradation. So you could just pit in your fuel windows. So it was a lot more options. Now you're going to have a lot more of kind of the stage flipping where you pit just before a caution's going to come out. So you kind of pit, And then when the caution comes out, you stay out, and anybody who stayed out for points kind of flips you. So you're going to have that. But with the playoffs, the way that they work now, only 10 cars are really racing for points. So you're really going to see 10 cars. They're racing for points versus each other, for the championship. So you're going to see those cars make decisions on whether they want to stay out and get the points and put themselves back in 25th for the next restart, or go ahead and take the chance that the points that they earn at the end of the race by their running position is greater than the points that they would have earned by taking the points at the stage break. So you're going to see this kind of weird right before 3 laps before a caution comes out for the stage, cars coming down pit road and cars staying on the racetrack, and you're going to see a little bit of weirdness there.
It's so crazy that you've got cars that aren't in the competition anymore, but they're still on track and just can mess stuff up and do bump drafts and all sorts. Matt, last question for JR before we let him go.
I wanted to ask this because you talked earlier about the stages and how little practice time you get. So if you think of an F1 strategy plan as being 90% complete and 10% reacting to things that happen, so you're learning as the race goes on, oh, the degradation's higher or lower, the evolution is more or less. In NASCAR, what would that number be? Because it seems like to me, you like, why even bother with much of a plan? Because you're going to learn everything in the first stage.
Yeah, that's a good question. We're probably, because of the unknown of the tire this specific week, we're probably 60% going to plan and 40% understanding what's just going to happen in the race. Because even though, like I said, we're going to have those first 2 stages to learn, we're never going to get a true long run until the final stage. That final stage, once it starts, is going to be the most natural seeming, like an F1 race, where it's just going to be, if there's really high degradation, you could have cars 2 stopping. If it's low degradation, you could have cars 1 stopping, splitting optimum. You could have cars pitting very early in the fuel window, hoping that they get a yellow. When the yellow comes out, they stay out and kind of flip. So you're going to have the unknowns, like you said, are huge. But, kind of like Mike was saying, we kind of got to prepare for if it's going to be high deg, if it's going to be low deg, if it's going to be, we have to be prepared for all those scenarios so that when they do happen, we're not as surprised by them. And we can react.
Well, rest up. I hope you're feeling a little bit better and you're all rested towards the weekend. Everybody go and catch up. And after the F1 race, I think there's a couple of hours break before the NASCAR race at Watkins Glen starts. I think it's available via Viaplay in the UK and other means. Some countries may be better at geo-blocking content than others. But JR, have a great weekend. We'll see you on the Saturday, and rush off to your meeting so that we don't get in trouble with your bosses.
Of course. I appreciate you guys having me. Looking forward to seeing you guys, seeing Juan Pablo, seeing that 3rd car this weekend, and seeing how the strategy plays out.
Definitely. We'll be Montoya fans for the weekend.
Of course. Thank you.
Cheers, JR. All right, Matt. Put us back in the scene. What are we doing for this Strat corner? We're looking backwards and we're looking forwards.
Yeah. I mean, there was a little bit of strategy in Monza that's probably worth talking about. And we certainly had some listener questions about that as well. So if it's all right, I figure we start with the Monza and then we take a look at the upcoming races.
Yeah, let's go for it. Yeah, I leave the guests in your capable hands, Matt.
Okay.
Thanks for your patience as well, Mike, by the way. Appreciate that.
I do sort of like that I may once again have been inadvertently responsible for making JR late to a meeting with Steve. But
Okay, so for context, we did have to have Matt more or less removed from the NASCAR motorhome last time we were there. I had a quiet word in my ear to remove Matt so that JR could get on with, preparing for Darlington.
Yes, I do have that effect on people. So obviously the big strategic story was Leclerc winning with that 1 stopper versus McLaren's that seemed to be faster. And so my first very simple question to you is, was that really the fastest strategy? I mean, it played out that way in real life. Or was this a case of the McLarens sort of taking each other out of contention for the win?
Yeah, I mean, So going in, I mean, I was chatting to you guys over the weekend, and going into the race, I thought it was a one stop. So I was surprised first one, I was surprised when the Red Bull started on the hard tire. But that's a different topic. But in terms of listening to the radio comments from McLaren and listening to what some of the other guys did, it appeared that the McLarens were set on a two stop, and after the first pit stops, you saw how hard they were kind of pushing to kind of make those gaps or keep the gaps, however they were. So as soon as you're doing that, it's going to make that one stop difficult, because you need to protect that tire early on in the stint, especially when you've got the graining onset, which was the degradation issue in Monza. So I think Leclerc played it absolutely, fantastically. It'd been interesting to see what McLaren would have done had it been the other way around. Had Norris been leading the race, would they have and had Piastri in between him and Leclerc, would they have then still done that? Because obviously they pitted Norris where they did as a threat to try and prevent the undercut from Ferrari. And for Ferrari then have got nothing to lose. So there's no point stopping now, because if we stop now, we just come out behind Norris again. So we might as well stay out. Worst that happens is we end up where we started. So it was actually easy in that respect from Ferrari. But what I'm surprised about on the McLaren bit was that for a start, they could have, Piastri had the gap in the lead at that point where they could have stopped. If they were going on a two stop, they could have stopped him first. And therefore, Leclerc then doesn't have the gap to drop into free air as such. He drops behind Piastri, so at best he's fighting for his second, and therefore you can then kind of use the Piastri to either hold Leclerc up or see if the one stop works with Norris, and then if they need to convert to a two, they can do. So that was surprising with me that they didn't play that hand. And I can understand why people went towards that two stop in the race, but looking back on it historically in Monza, it always tends towards that one stop, and it really that's what surprised me from it.
So at Spa, where Russell got disqualified in the end at Spa, right? Yep. So, but in theory, that strategy could have worked if you'd have identified that from the beginning. It could have worked. So, and you called it before you went. I'm really surprised. This is a one stop. Why are you seeing these one stops and the teams don't seem to be?
I mean, I have the great position now where I have no pressure. So if I call it wrong, I call it wrong. That I think that's part of it. But yeah, the one thing from me, what I took from it is Spa, obviously going into the race, everyone saw Heidegg on the Friday and thought it was a two stop. And then you actually go into it, it's the same kind of conditions as Monza. A lot of the track was resurfaced. The track was still in a kind of green state. It improved as it goes on, and the one stop is possible. And that's kind of what I saw in Monza. You expect the track to rubber in. It was hot temperatures, but graining was down, and graining can be protected. So you just drive that bit slower. And that's what kind of pushed me. It's a long pit stop loss at Monza as well. It's 25 seconds. So if you're doing an extra, so you've got to make up 25 seconds of race time. And with graining tires as well, to make that up, you've then got to push them. And if you push early on in the stint, you then grain them again. And then by the end of that 25 seconds, you're falling off, which I think you see a few of the cars who did the two stop, who tried to push, then just dropped off at the end anyway. So I feel teams just got the management wrong, and it just panicked themselves a little bit, I think, from potentially what they did in the first stint, where the medium did grain, which was always going to happen, same as in Spa. The first stint, the medium grained, and you've put it in, and they've not translated it through to say, yes, but the hard's a more robust tire, the track's going to be in a better condition, we can manage this, it's a long pit stop loss, a one stop is definitely possible.
So one thing that I noticed, because I do want to come back to the fact that you essentially think McLaren made a race-losing error by not splitting their strategy. And I'm not putting words in your mouth at all when I say that. I want to ask, because I noticed that for the one-stoppers, they all stopped really early in the race, like lap 15 to about lap 18. And if you didn't stop around there, you were not winning like anyone on the reverse strategy starting on the hard. Is there something to the effect of the full fuel load and the start on these tires that makes that be the case in all races? Or was it just specific to sort of this one race?
No, so I think you're always going to be harder on the tires at the beginning of the race. There's a number of factors. So you've got the, like you mentioned, the full fuel load, so that's already putting more load through the tires. You've got more sliding. You've got the tire warm up at the beginning of the race, so you've got obviously the formation lap. You've got the sat on the grid, so you're not starting the race with the tires as you would be coming out the pits. So you've got that little bit of sliding. You're battling for position those first few laps of the race, so you're therefore then doing things which you haven't settled into the groove. You're potentially taking that little bit more out of the tires because you're trying to make up positions in that bit. So that first stint is always not as representative as later on in the race. You will always take out more of the tires in that first part of the race, and then the final one is that the track will evolve as the race goes on. So even if it is improved over the weekend, you'll still see it improve as the race goes on as well. And that first bit of the race is going where it's going to be the worst. And then it improves as it goes on. So you'll get less sliding, you've got lighter fuel load, so you're less sliding again. So yeah, really later on in the race is where the tires are going to be performing the best.
Yeah, it's crazy. It feels crazy that so many teams have missed the one stop in the end. And I wouldn't be feeling that if we didn't have you before time, ahead of time, saying that the one stop would work. And by the way, when I was saying to people, I had WhatsApped someone saying that Ferrari should stay out to win the race. It was Mike that I WhatsApped, so Mike can confirm that I also called that. Once Norris pitted, it seemed obvious, didn't it? It was like, oh, hang on a minute.
Oh, yeah.
Ferrari have got this.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, this was like they literally had the decision made for them, Ferrari. There, they're laughing because, as I mentioned, like worst case scenario, the tire drops off, the McLaren's catch back up and overtake, and you finish third. It's fine. It was the type of degradation where they weren't going to run out of rubber, so it's not like the tires were going to totally fall off the cliff. It was a graining, so you get that bit of graining, so it degrades, and then it just stabilizes. But you'll stabilize 1.5, 2 seconds off the pace at that point with not a lot of rubber, but you'll make it to the end. It won't be that case where you suddenly drive in 4, 5, 6 seconds off the pace and you lose a pit stop gap in 2, 3 laps.
So I was trying to explain graining on the ringer, and it's a different audience on the ringer. It's a lot of people who came in with Drive to Survive, and then as I was talking, I realised how much I didn't understand graining. But I'd started down that path of it. Maybe Matt understands it more than I do, but I think it's worth kind of just rehashing a little bit exactly what graining is, because you've surprised me there by saying it settles at a level. I thought the graining cleared, eventually. Matt, you get in before Mike answers that properly.
Well, the simple and best explanation for graining is to get a pencil eraser and push it back and forth across a piece of paper. That's graining. That's what's happening on the face of the tire. And you get these little bits of rolled up rubber that reduce the amount of available grip. And it can happen for a lot of different reasons that I won't get into because, time. But essentially, that's what's going on. When they say graining, it's a thing that often happens during a stint. Sometimes it will clear, sometimes it will stabilize. But I think Mike would probably know even more about it than me in terms of its effect on the race.
Yes. Yeah. So, sorry. Yeah. So, when I say stabilize and clear is basically the same thing. So the graining clears, but you've lost a chunk of rubber, so the tire isn't at the performance anymore. Right. So therefore, then the lap time stabilizes at that degradation, which is 1.5, 2 seconds off what your prime tire performance would be. And you often see it at tracks which are being resurfaced because the smooth surfaces. So you've gone away from the kind of abrasion grip where the kind of stones are digging into the rubber, and you're getting that kind of grip in there where you're actually using the chemical properties of the rubber. So the rubber heats up and then just starts to roll away, like Matt says, like a rubber on a smooth piece of paper, basically.
Yeah, I would love to take credit for it, but I believe it was Scarbs that came up with that one. He might have gotten it from someone else. But I do have.
Yeah, no, sorry. Just the last bit on the graining. Again, it felt surprising that like McLaren and Mercedes seem to get into that graining phase and go, this isn't going to get any better, whereas Ferrari seem to maybe keep their heads a little bit and go, this is going to settle, we're okay. And so it's surprising to see that variance in approach from strategists.
Well, I mean, and I think like I said, so Ferrari, I believe, listened to the radio comms. They were about to box Leclerc, so they literally did the box opposite on Norris.
Oh, okay.
So
it was a bit...
and then Norris stopped. So then they just they had a decision made for them in that respect. And I think listening to the Mercedes comments after the race, so when Russell made his second stop, so he'd already run with set of hards. They looked at the tires and went, "Oh, we've got a lot of rubber left on these,"
no.
and realized that then they didn't. So it's. I think people were panicked by the first stint because the mediums grained, and then obviously you had the Red Bulls on the first stint on the hard, and they grained, and I think that spooked a lot of people that the hard tire on the Red Bulls didn't perform, which meant I think pushed people into that bit where they needed to make the second stop. But like I said, that early stint performance isn't always representative. And I was having a chat with a guy I knew in that before the race to say, and he was asking me about starting on the medium or hard, and I said, don't start on the hard because it's going to spook you into doing something you don't want to do. Hang
on a minute. I think I know. I can complete that story in my head with people and personnel by joining dots, but I'm not going to say. Sorry, last one on that is, why did then, if they saw that Norris had a lot of rubber left, they then also pitted Piastri? Which is
so that was Mercedes who said that, not McLaren.
Oh,
so
sorry, right, good. I'm with you.
That was with Russell. So I'm not sure what McLaren's one. Listening to McLaren's radio, they spoke to Piastri, and Piastri was saying he couldn't make it to the end. But at the same time, I mean, they pushed that stint longer. I mean, he might have lost out in the end, but yeah, it was one of those ones where he seems like he was a bit in no man's land, where they finally made that stop. I don't know, it was a 15 lap stint at the end on it, and where Leclerc's on old tires, you can kind of think, I've got newer tires than Leclerc anyway. His lap times at that point, I don't believe Leclerc was catching him. So it was one of those ones where, yeah, they should have maybe, they should, like was mentioned earlier, in my thought, they should have split the strategies, and then they would have had the option either way. If the one didn't work, then they had a guy on a successful two, and vice versa.
Okay, we're moving into listener question territory, but before we go there, one tiny question for you personally as a strategist. I did some extremely complicated math after this race, and by that I mean simple division, which for me is very complicated. And I found that the margin, like if I calculated average lap time for, I think it was Piastri and Leclerc, was only about 0.05 of a second over the course of the whole race. So if you're a strategist and you get to the end of the race and you look at that, do you think, nothing I could do about that because things out of my control, like say drivers, for example? Or do you look at it and say, how did I screw up by that huge a margin?
Yeah, I think for that one, it's, I mean, when the paces are matching that closely and you do an extra pit stop, then you've got to not be that. So like if your pace is that, you've got to be much quicker. You in that aspect of it. You need to, I'd be annoyed with myself if I was in charge of the Piastri's one. Like you look at it. For start, Leclerc didn't have the pace to overtake. So even if he did the same strategy, younger tires. So like he wouldn't have been able to overtake unless he's holding something back. But if he's holding something back and you're on the same strategy and he overtakes you, then that's what it is. That's a faster car passing and have been driving the tires better, which is again why it was a little bit strange how they pitted Piastri for the second time.
Because that wouldn't be improved if he has got a fast enough car to overtake. That's not going to improve by pitting and trying to catch up that faster car. You've lost anyway. Yeah, that was the most surprising one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, and like, I know McLaren came out and said that there was nothing they could do about it, but I bet the strategy guys are kicking themselves a little bit. But
interesting.
It always is in that one. If you're beaten by a car who does one pit stop less than you, and you're not even competing towards the end of the race either, then it is what it is. But the fact that he had two cars as well, where they could have played the game, that's the one which is, I think, probably the most thing they'll be annoyed about.
I mean, we play armchair strategist, Matt, and so I always feel bad with saying, well, the strategy mucked that up, from my sitting in my shed. But Mike, who knows full well the pain of getting the odd call wrong here and there, I'm sure, hearing you say that is pretty cool, and that is a treat for us as the first listeners here, Matt.
All right, so we're going to get down to what I like to call brass tacks with our listener question here, and this was sort of a conversation, so several listeners got into it. But fundamentally, as a strategist, would you prefer to have a team that has a distinct number one driver, or do you prefer the battle of equals that is currently the thing at McLaren?
I think so. When you're fighting for the championship or a championship, so driver or constructors, you obviously want 2-1s. You want a McLaren situation when you're fighting for constructors. If you're fighting for drivers, you don't quite want a McLaren one. But it's that being said, you want a distinct number one. I think when you're battling for a championship, but you want someone who's doing what Piastri's doing in McLaren. I know he's not officially a number two, but in that sense. However, like when you with how I was with Haas for a number of years down in the midfield, you very much want two drivers who matching each other, who are pushing each other, who can pick up the points, and you're not relying on one to be up there in P6, P7 when you got a chance, and the other one always just dawdles around P13, P14. You want two drivers who can do it. So if one's faster on one weekend, great. You're not fighting for the championship, but you are fighting for your place in the championship, and you need both drivers to do it.
It's so fascinating this season because there's a few things at play. McLaren have lost the championship like this before with two drivers battling in 2007 and then Ferrari sneaking in all under the cloud of perhaps secret sanctions in the background. Very, very similar to 2007 this so far. There's a few factors here, which because I've got this slight, and this is purely conspiracy theory, I've got almost this feeling in my head like Red Bull know they can't win either title. So like they're almost out of it. I've got no evidence to back that up. I've just got this feeling that somehow, like Verstappen was saying, we're not going to win any more races. He just flat out said, we're not going to win any more races this season. But if there was technical solutions coming, like they said in Kota, then you kind of go, oh, well, maybe we'll win some races once this fix comes in. But for him to just say, we're not going to win any more races, there's something else in the background that we don't know. So maybe McLaren sense or know that too. And now they're kind of going, well, it is a fair fight between Piastri and Norris for the championship. But then Leclerc is rearing his head as well. They've got to watch out behind for Leclerc coming through. Like, this is just a fascinating championship. And I feel like there's going to be a book in about 10 years that explains it in more detail.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. And I always take what Verstappen says with a pinch of salt as well. I don't know if he's just saying that because he's trying to basically give people a kick back at the factory, or if he's saying it for a natural reason, or if he's just been a bit petulant or something, and he's like not happy with things, so he's just going to say it. So there's trying to tell any of those one, but I kind of feel he's a little bit clever in terms of he's trying to either downplay the success, but then he knows they've got things coming. Maybe, I don't know. It's all mind games within teams. It always has been, always will be, and it's part of the things which is actually quite good about the sport in that sense.
Drama.
And I just wanted to ask, as a follow-up to that first question, do you think that in this instance, McLaren was too fair by putting both drivers on the same strategy? Do you think that might have been part of it? Or are you convinced by Zach's, oh, we never thought a one-stop was possible, which frankly, I'm not, but that's just me.
I mean, listening to the radio comments from the drivers, I get the impression they didn't think a one stop was possible. But that's not to say they shouldn't have tried with one. Even if the driver says something, like we know that if Leclerc suddenly starts gaining on Piastri doesn't make that second stop, and Leclerc starts gaining, overtakes him, then Piastri's still got a gap to make that second stop and finish third, or stays out and finishes third or second.
Yeah,
you're not overall losing anything, and
but you're undercutting your teammates. See, this is the thing. This is why I'm asking this question,
Mike. So why I like talking to you is, I know you've got professional business out in the F1 world, but you're also absorbing these races, A, as a enthusiastic strategist, and B, as a fan of the sport as well. So do you not listen to the commentary? Are you zoned in on the team radio? Because I find it distracting to try and listen to it.
So I always, so if something interesting happens, I'll go back on the team radio after the fact. I don't listen to it live, but I also don't listen to the commentary either. So
can we all do that? Can we all listen back live, or is that like a secret Mike Caulfield thing? Can we listen back to the radios?
I think on the F1 app you can.
Interesting. Go on, Matt.
Yeah, I was going to say the F1 app makes that absolutely possible. And that's frequently something I'll do before a show too. If there was controversy about a thing or we're not sure about something, a lot of times they will talk about it on the radio.
That's unfair. That's why you sometimes know things and make me sound stupid. I didn't know you had information or did research.
Well, you know, that is kind of, I enjoy that part of it quite a bit.
Matt, we have limited time with Mike, okay. So I want to make sure we talk about Baku and Singapore as well. So whatever your next point was, and I think we had an outstanding listener question as well.
We did have one more listener question. No, I was just going to say again, like, because I dragged up the Pirelli pit stop thing. I'm just amazed at how narrow the window was in the first stint, because Magnussen, who finished at the front of the midfield minus a penalty, stopped on lap 14. Piastri was on lap 16. Sainz going to lap 19 ruined his race. And it just, like, the margin there is just astonishing to me. Is that something you predict ahead of time, or is that something that you just saw an opportunity early on and took it, and it wound up working out better than you hoped?
So I think a lot of it gets triggered off from these cars behind. So I think potentially that early window, I think some cars have stopped too soon. So but that triggers others to then cover off. So, for example, George's first stop on lap 11 for me was too early. He's obviously again trying to, I don't know, he's going for, I can't exactly remember the reason why he stopped that early, but he's around 2 Red Bulls are on the hard, so they're not stopping. So it's not like
he's front wing damage, didn't he? He lost an end plate.
That was it. Yeah. But again, I don't know if it was a case he needs it, but that fair play. So he stops, but he then starts interacting with those other cars. There's, I think, it was Ocon or Gasly was the earliest stopper. Yeah, Gasly, sorry. Yeah. Sorry.
Gasly. Ocon was on the hard tire. He went very
that was
long.
Ocon. Yeah. But then, I think so. Gasly stops, and then he triggers that kind of reaction to it. I think if you're looking at it, and this is where I was kind of saying in that early conversation, that Monza's one of those races that if your tires are holding on okay, you don't want to stop on the too early side, because it's a place, if you've got the tires and you're not falling off, you can overtake at Monza. So you're not fully worried about track position. You mentioned about Sainz going long to 19, and he starts to drop off that a little bit, so potentially he should have maybe brought it, but he's basically just covering off until Lewis comes into his window and he blocks him off, and I think that's maybe what he realizes what his race was. So again, he's trying to protect that second stint. I don't think he was ever in contention for that kind of race win. For example, he could have gone on the early side to try and undercut Norris, but I still think he was starting to drop back on that one, so he probably wouldn't have done it. And even at that point, you're then risking undercutting your lead driver at that point. So I think I wouldn't say maybe Sainz has gone too long. I think Sainz is actually probably what the team's generally aiming for, that kind of lap 17, 18, and then they're just trying to cover off. So, for example, I said about track being able to overtake, but if you can only go 1-2 laps more than someone, you then don't have the tire offset. If you know you can go for another 7-8 laps on that tire, yes, extend it, lose the position, but I've got the tire offset later on in the race, and potentially I'm making the 2-stop work. I think the window earlier on in it was basically lap 12 was that kind of no man's land. If you went 12 or earlier, it was definite 2-stop region. 12 to kind of 14, 16 for me was that kind of 1-stop is borderline, and after 16 you're definitely 1-stopping, and that's kind of how it worked out as well. So I think with K-Mag, he kind of stopped on the early side. I think he probably would have actually, because obviously it put him out behind Gasly, and then obviously he got the penalty because of it, and got the race ban because of it. So if you actually look at it, you go, right, either he should have stopped a lap earlier to cover the Gasly one, knowing that it was potential undercut, but then that puts him on the early side for that one stop. And actually looking at his pace and looking at the Alpine's pace, the Alpine started to drop off significantly at that first stint. So for me with K-Mag, he probably should have pushed it a couple of laps later. He should have maybe pushed it to that 16, 17. The car had the pace to then make the positions back up, and then he would have come to Gasly, much better pace. Should have been that the overtake would have been easy at that point, or easier, sorry. So that's probably my take on the K-Mag one. But I think his race was really well executed in that sense, and they made the one stop work like other teams should have done on the grid, and just unfortunate for the penalty, which I mean was harsh at best, I think.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, I actually went back and looked at the video several times, and I think he should have had a very realistic case for that to be a racing incident and not just a penalty, because Gasly didn't leave him a whole lot of room on that apex.
I mean, I think the fact that Gasly even came out afterwards and said it was a racing incident, kind of.
I don't know. I think though, if you send it like that and he locked up a little bit as well, so the optics aren't good. So the
lockup was what sold it. Yeah.
So you are risking a penalty.
Yeah. As soon as he locks up, you take you're no longer in control of the car. So yes, you are risking it. But, and this is where we go back to the kind of strategic point. If you'd potentially just waited a couple more laps, because he obviously pitted one lap later, got undercut. If you know you've lost the undercut, right, how much more has this tyre got? Have I got 2-3 more laps in it? Push it that little bit longer, and you've just got more of that kind of offset. And yeah, the Alpine struggled massively. They really struggled with the grading, so they were always going to be on a 2. So actually, he wasn't really racing him anyway. And as long as he wasn't, I think everyone around him, he was faster than in that sense, and we're committing to a 2-stop.
Hey, look, big K-Mag fan here, but I think previous comes into it as well. So when they see a HAAS locked up into the side of another car, I think it's just like muscle memory. They just write the penalty points in, and so he's got that race ban now for Baku. He didn't seem massively bothered. His tweet was brilliant. Good news, got a point. Bad news, banned for a race. I think he's just going to put his feet up. He's probably resigned, to this being his last season as well. But it does mean we're going to have 7 races and 2 sprint races where Kevin Magnussen probably physically can't amass enough penalty points for another ban. So we have got Magnussen unleashed for the rest of the season. What can they do? They can't do anything. It's going to be great.
No, that's a good point. Yeah. So
Let's go.
We can see some more aggressive driving.
So I feel like we've got 2 fairly similar to Monza tracks coming up. That's my perception. You've got Baku and Monza, and they're both very kind of stop-starty. So if a car was running well in Monza, Matt's shaking his head. Does that
I'm going to disagree on Singapore due to the nature of the corners, but Baku, similar.
Okay, so what are we expecting, Mike? What do we look out for from a Strat point of view, and how similar will it be to Monza? Because I want the rest of the season to finish how Monza finished. And if that does happen, then Leclerc's champion. And I'm still hanging on to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think from Baku's point of view is, I mean, I'm hoping I'm wrong, but I'm not expecting it to be too exciting in terms of a strategic point of view. It's looking at last year's tyre, it's the same compounds. It's the C3, C4, C5.
Oh,
it should be. I mean, it's the softest they've got, but you people are just going to run the medium and hard, and it's going to be a one-stop, I think. I'll be very surprised. It's obviously slightly different time of year to what it was last year, so it might be that a little bit warmer. The degradation on the cars is slightly higher this year, but I don't think it's going to push it enough to push it into that kind of 2-stop window. However, you do obviously have the chance of multiple safety cars, DSCs, red flags. So that's, I mean, we're never hoping for a big crash, but potentially hoping for a bit of something there to mix it up a little.
We're hoping for a big, safe, well-timed crash. When they go for the softest compound, though, that always rings the alarm bells from me, Matt, that it's an insanely low-wearing thing. Like they haven't even got the option to go for a softer, more wearing tyre, which means that, tyre wear is not really a factor.
Yeah, it tends not to be at the street circuits. And in fact, I think my question to Mike on this originally was, let me guess, the strategy is don't hit things and go faster. And you can just go with that and you're fine. But it occurred to me suddenly, one thing that we've seen resurgence of is the issues with the car bouncing. And Baku has a very, very, very long, extremely high speed straight. So there might be some surprises, I think, in qualifying and in the race, because if you're bouncing like that, you're going to have to either address it by losing ride height, which means losing downforce in the slow sections, or you're going to have to live with it at the end of straights, which means potentially losing control of the car or doing a lot more damage to the tires than you normally would. Is that an adequate assessment?
It is, but I think with it being a street circuit as well, so Singapore will be the same concept, that you won't be able to run them cars as low as you would be on a Monza or somewhere like that anyway. So they're already ride heights are going to be put up a little bit. So whether that increase in ride height will then reduce the bouncing to a level where the balance is still okay, you're not losing a huge amount of downforce. That's to be seen. But yeah, I think that's a reasonable assumption. But yeah, they'll generally run the cars. Baku's smoother, so they try to run it a little bit lower at Baku, but Singapore's already bumpy as anyway, so you already have to increase the ride height quite a bit at Singapore for the amount of bumps they've got there.
Yeah, so I was disagreeing with Spanners. Singapore is different because I remember like the short 90-degree corners being absolute horror show for the Red Bull. And I'm just going to ask, sort of based on your general observations this season, who do you think amongst the top four teams might be advantaged by the nature of the Singapore corners that we might see?
I think Singapore is an interesting one. It's caught out. I mean, it caught us out in 2015 Mercedes when we were dominating, and then 2015 had an absolute nightmare at Singapore.
Overheating?
And partly it's because it's that concept where it is quite harsh on the tires, and you try to protect the tires, but then you get the setup wrong because you're trying to overprotect it, which can affect your aero platform. In terms of the top four teams, I mean, you've got to potentially look at like Ferrari being quite strong at Singapore. I'd imagine it's a circuit which they could do quite well at. I think it's an interesting one. What they've added this year at Singapore as well, though, because obviously they've got rid of they're still the same layout as last year, so they've got rid of the bit on the under the stadium. But they've added an extra DRS zone now down that straight, and there's now 4 DRS zones in Singapore as well. So that could make quite a bit of difference as well in terms of how you're going to set up your car, because obviously now you could potentially go even higher downforce because you've got so much of the track is now DRS.
So was it 2015 where Mercedes were hacking chunks out of the car for extra cooling? I know it was that era when you were there. I'm sure there was one where they just hadn't got the cooling right and they were with clippers at the side of the track. Is that not ringing any bells?
I think that was 2015. No, I think that was a bit earlier than that. Yeah, no, 2015 was just we turned up and we were a second and a half off the pace for some reason and never recovered it over the weekend.
And the annoying thing about Singapore is that teams, because it's so hard to overtake, teams would rather crawl around Monaco style than risk a pit stop. So you end up basically towards the end of the first stint, everyone's just crawling around, and then they're all stopping at the same time, and there's no real massive undercut because I guess it takes a long time to come in and out of those pits, would be my guess. But it's just always seems to descend into just quite a dull one-stop race.
Yeah, I mean, I think Singapore is the longest pit stop last of the year. I think it's 29 seconds or something like that. So it's, I mean, obviously it's the track. It's a bit quicker now because of the track layout, and the track was a long distance on it. But yeah, it was always used to be designated by safety cars, and I think there's been a safety car in every single Singapore race. So there's a high chance there will be another one. So I think basically people try and plan their strategy around when the safety car will come out, if possible. It was quite good, I think, back in 2017 when you had the option of 17 or 18 when there was the hyper soft and the ultra soft and all those kind of compounds, and you're basically soft. But that's when you get a case where actually qualifying in P11 in Singapore was better because you got to start on a better tire and everyone else was having to pit after 6 laps, so that was a nightmare. But now obviously that decision's gone away. So yeah, you're right, everyone kind of the softest compound probably won't be used, and then it'd be medium and hards again, which are the C3 and C4. So I think, again, it depends on safety cars in that respect as well.
Yeah, not trying to be pessimistic, but if there's no rain and no safety cars, both of these next Grand Prix could basically be an email. You know, that you could. There's just so little that happens. But look, I think Baku's got about a 50-50 hit rate for being an interesting race. Mike, we've taken up so much of your time. Thank you so much. You did chicken out when I asked you on Twitter on Friday of Monza to do some predictions, because you did claim that after FP2
you asked me on Zandvoort and I wasn't working that weekend.
Oh right, this is Zandvoort. Okay, I'm sorry for the slander then, but we'll definitely try and catch up with you after Friday for Baku and Singapore as well. And
not Singapore, I'm not working it.
Oh, there you go, Baku. Follow Mike at Mike Caulfield, Caul. You can figure out the rest. Thank you so much for your time. Go and follow Matt at MattPT55. Follow me, Spanners, at Spanners Ready. And we will see you after Baku. Until next time, work hard, be kind, and have fun. This was Missed Apex Podcast.